Okay, see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, most of us seem to be here almost. So, how's everybody today? I'm the only one excited to be alive.
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mackey. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. Just fine. Just fine. Indeed. Okay, let's see who's in the room today so far. I don't see Maricel. Oh, Maricel dealing with the matter. Okay, Paula.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Paula. How do you pronounce your last name again?
Hilaire.
Hilaire. Okay, doggone it. Okay. Good morning, Paula Hilaire.
Good morning, Mr. Wilkinson.
How was your week?
Very long, but I made it.
I know you made it nevertheless. Absolutely, absolutely. Did you run into any risk issues this week that you could identify? Or things were moving so fast you didn't even see the risk?
Things were moving too fast for me to see any risk.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Risk issues. Things are moving so fast we don't see the risk until they actually impact
Happen.
us. Yes, yes. And that's not even in your notes. They try to imply it, but we never say it directly in the academic world because we keep the academic world very romantic, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. All the great learning is fine. We don't really put all the dirt in the academics. We have to experience it or imply it. Mm. And if you don't be in sessions like this, you may not even hear that being spoken too many places. That's the interesting thing about these things. Okay. Great to have you, Paula.
Thank you.
Sophia.
Good morning.
Hi, Sophia.
Hi.
See, like Paula, you made another week.
Yes, I made it. Thank God.
Indeed. Did you run into any risk issues this week?
I'm quite sure I did, but don't ask me to name any.
Yeah, it's funny how we know we run into these things, but we either don't want to name them or we cannot. We cannot
Just willfully ignore.
just willfully. Wow, I like that. We just willfully ignore. We're not even ignorant. We know what it is. Yet, absolutely. But I'm so happy that you guys are at least aware of the subtleties of it. And if that's all you gather from my sessions, then I am a very happy lecturer because in essence, that's the real reality, my mind, that we all have to contend with. Thank you for that bit of information, Sophia, being honest about the whole madness. All right, Trinique.
Morning. How are you?
Good morning, fine, Trinique. You care to name any of the risks you encountered this week?
Oh boy, for sure. I'll honestly say I'll give employee this week.
All right.
Employees, I can point that one out this week.
Yeah, employee risk.
Yeah, we have some resignments going on, so I'm pretty sure the likelihood of some risks will be increasing.
You know what, Trinique? Whether you realize it or not, that is one of the key business risks that companies face all the time. They have a fancy name for it called human risk, but it's all of the things that come into play, including resignations and everything connected there too. Some people think resignations are just because people are going for more money somewhere. That is not always the truth.
Yeah.
Sometimes resignations carry other risks
You're
that
right.
are identified or not identified. So yes, thank you for throwing that bit of truth out
Mhm.
because like anything else, the human side of everything, whether we like it or not, believe it or not, is always the biggest problem. True or false?
That's true.
My mind. Spooky, as we used to say in the old days. Spooky as hell.
Excuse me, Mr. Wilkerson, are you saying something?
Yeah, good morning. Mr. Wilkinson didn't say anything. He probably have some technical issues. This is Miguel.
Hi, hello, hi.
Oh, sorry. Okay, my bad.
I got it.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, Benitra, are you there?
I'm here.
Good morning, Benitra. You were not here last week with us.
Good morning. No, I was not.
Okay, that's fine. That means that you have to now introduce yourself to us, Benitra, because we did our introductions last week.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Benitra. I'm employed at Scotia Bank. My title is CPA, or Client Portfolio Analyst.
Okay. And you're doing this course because
I'm interested in learning about financial planning.
about financial planning for sure. And I know you know by now, anytime you're dealing with customers, any issue on financial planning can come up at any time, in any capacity. So, no doubt, you're definitely in the right place, and hopefully all these different parts, including risk. We were talking about all the issues concerning risk last week, how to manage it, how to identify it, how to analyze it, and we'll continue that discussion today. Plus, we had all our little bits and pieces coming in about. Somebody mentioned this morning even that sometimes we work in organizations and we don't even see the risk that is facing us because we're too busy, we're too disconnected, or we see it and we're too afraid to acknowledge it, and we don't want to report it, etc., for one reason or another. So, unlike passing an entry with a debit and credit, unlike taking cash and putting it in custody, unlike preparing loan documentation to close a loan, shake hands, and give a check, risk management is a very subtle and all too quiet phenomena within organizations and without. So thank you very much, Benitra. Welcome aboard. Join the party. As I told folks last week, this party is a party where you can speak anytime. You can give us any feedback you want. You can give us examples of anything you've seen from day to day. You don't have to call any names. You can do anything you want practically in terms of what you want to say. You don't have to put up your hands. You don't have to ask for permission. Just start talking. Okay, Benitra?
Gotcha.
Excellent. We actually even take political questions if you have them. How about that? Because everything is connected to risk, particularly politics. So if you have a risk issue that involves politics, don't be bashful. We're not talking about individuals individually, we're just talking about the issues that surround our organizations and our day-to-day. All right, which we don't always see in the academic world. Dimitri.
Morning.
Morning, Dimitri. We need you to introduce yourself to us since you were not here last week.
Oh, yes, my apology for that.
No
Good
problem.
morning, class. My name is Dimitri Maki. I'm employed at Scotiabank. I am the branch manager of the Street and Soldier Road. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. And you're doing this class because
I wanted to further my knowledge from a financial planner aspect. I would have taken the certified international risk manager course last year. It was very beneficial to me in my role, and I thought that this certification can further assist me when it comes to assisting customers with their financial needs and their financial future as well.
by all means, without a doubt. And perhaps I'm a little biased in my perspective since I'm responsible for this particular module, but suffice it to say that notwithstanding anything else you do, make sure you consider risk as a common denominator, or you will either experience the consequences or you will feel them one way or the other. Okay, I'm sure you're well aware of the nature of risk, and hopefully the discussions will just widen your perspective and keep you alert, especially as a branch manager, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Unfortunately for you, you cannot look with tunnel vision. You have to look over the entire spectrum. And the entire spectrum is filled with risk-related issues. So you are definitely in the right place, Dimitri. And as a result, feel free. If you have anything you want to say, any experiences, remember everything anyone says, it helps your colleagues in terms of what other persons in business might be experiencing, particularly in financial services, but of course, everywhere. Okay? Everywhere risk exists, doesn't matter where it is, in and out of organizations. Okay? All right, thank you, Dimitri. Welcome aboard. The only person I don't see so far is Vonette. I guess Vonette will join us when she gets here. All right. Does anybody remember what we talked about? By the way, before we go on, somebody mentioned something. I said to somebody, "Can you identify a risk that took place?" And they said, "Sure as hell I can." This in the last week. I'm like, okay, what do you think you identified? And the person said, well, we had some resignations, and in my opinion, that represents some kind of risk. And I said, yeah. In the textbook, it's called human risk or human resources risk. And whether we're aware of it or not, when people resign, there's always some risk attached to it, one way or the other, whether you realize it or not, whether you're aware of the extent of it or not. Some organizations believe or feel that, if they're big enough, they can say, so fine, you resigned, so what? See you. And that might be so. But even in those situations, there is some underlying issues that we may or may not be aware of. Small organizations, of course, have a different scenario when people resign. The risk is, quote unquote, tend to be even greater because of the nature of their resources and having to bounce back from risk issues. Okay? So, in essence, we are constantly being bombarded with risk-related issues, whether we're aware of them or not. And so a lot of what we've been talking about last time and today will have to do with how we identify these risks and how we mitigate them, how we manage them, how we accept them, how we treat them, how we even ignore them, put our heads in the sand. While I remember, does everybody have a copy of the case study?
From the PDF, yeah.
Okay, lovely. Remember, at the end of the case study, are some questions. You don't have to limit your answer just to the questions I ask. What I want you to do is to look at the case study, look at the questions, and respond as openly as you can in your approach to it. You don't have to be restricted only to the context of our lectures and your notes. You can go outside of that if you want to make the connections. In addition to the financial and even accounting side of that case. And the reason why I included that one with the financial accounting side with the motel, because I know you had some discussions about financial issues, and hopefully you can connect some of that to it as well. But the key aspect of that case, along with anything else, are the risk issues that you recognize, that you identify, and that you suggest suggestions with regards to how to deal with those potential risks. Okay, that's the kind of approach I would like for you to take. Okay,
Mr. Wilkinson, could resignations also fall under operational risk?
no question about it. How did you make that connection?
Because I know if I'm thinking if a lot of persons are resigning, then it's going to affect the daily operations of the business. So I just wanted to, I know you mentioned people risk, but I just wanted to ask if it could also be operational.
Oh, absolutely. When people resign, for example, it has a direct effect on operations more than anything else. The only reason why we refer to it specifically academically is because we have other kinds of human risks that are not resignations. As a matter of fact, we have a second kind of risk that we have in addition to human risk that we call operational risks. And those are the exact risks that I think you're thinking about in terms of the impact that resignations can have on an organization by all means. I mean, for example, if somebody just calls in sick one day, all of a sudden, Dimitri, you have to start changing things around, yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, because one person calling in sick will change your operations for that day. If they call in sick for a week, it'll change your operations for that week and maybe the entire month, depending on the situation you're dealing with. So yes, you're absolutely right. And any organization that is not considering these kinds of things, preferably in advance, like it shouldn't be a shock every time. Oh my God, somebody's out sick for 2 days. What are we going to do? That's okay once or twice, maybe, and maybe in some unexpected situation, but it shouldn't be a shock years and years later. And for many organizations, for some reason, operational and other kinds of risks continue to be a quote unquote shock to them. Okay, so yeah, absolutely, Dimitri, absolutely. All right. So yeah, we need to keep our perspectives open just like that, so that we stay connected to the potential risks that we have to face and mitigate and deal with. There are many other types of risks, by the way, other than human risk and operational risks. It's a long list, and even that list is not an exhaustive list. For example, let me throw out a few others to you. Maybe you may want to make a note of them mentally or otherwise. And when I call out the name of these risks, I want somebody to give me some throwback on what type of risk you think they are, or some example. Okay? That's our little exercise for this morning. Here we go. Compliance risk. Anybody? What is it, you think?
Policies and procedures.
Yeah, where's the risk with that?
Big risk if you're not compliant.
Yeah, if you don't have them in place, you run the risk of having regulators come in, right? You remember that thing called on-site inspections? Or the central bank calling you about something that you're supposed to be compliant with and you're not?
Fines and jail time.
Yeah, fines and potential jail time. Nobody's gone to jail in the Bahamas yet for white collar crime, at least nobody at the highest levels. We keep locking up like people who steal $1,000. Now, don't get me wrong, stealing is stealing. However, anybody knows what white collar crime is in this class? Notice, I don't have these things in my notes, but because these are the things we don't discuss in the formal academic notes, we discuss them on the periphery, which is days like today. Anyone? What is white collar crime?
You said what is white collar crime in the Bahamas?
No, in general, not only in the Bahamas.
I think it's non-violent, like non-violent crime that's more so tied to either like corruption or finances and stuff like that.
No question about it. White collar crime is a criminal behavior that occurs in financial institutions and other organizations, not only financial institutions, any organization where there's fraud, corruption, or other criminal activity at the highest level in the firm or organization. When the board members, when the CEO and the COO and the top persons in the organization are individually or collectively involved in criminal behavior. Anybody ever heard about that?
Yeah, like
Anybody ever heard about that kind of crime?
Yes, definitely.
tax evasions, all those.
Yeah, definitely.
FTX.
As a matter of fact, the major financial criminal activity that occurs in most organizations occur at the top. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Well, if you didn't, you know today. And is there risk connected to white collar crime? Anyone?
Yeah, because if it's at the top, then it'll probably involve like executives and people on the board of directors, which would ultimately affect operations.
Operations, reputation, financial resources, the whole 9 yards. That's why it is often said, whenever the top is corrupt, the organization is in trouble. That's why we have all of these compliance laws and rules now. Not that corruption is new, not that corruption at the top is new, but because of the risk it faced to the ongoing operations of any organization, financial or otherwise. Are there any corrupt churches in the world?
Mr. Wilkinson, can I, if I could add, I mean, you're talking about the white collar crime and all of that.
Yes.
I guess for me, I would say just how everything evolves, even how people are now paying more attention to the risks and all of that. I
Right.
think even that has evolved because like we look at the risks when it comes to the white collar crime, but unfortunately, like you say, it didn't just start, it's still here. But the
No,
sad thing about it is it's still only the small man that feels the pinch from it.
always, always, always. The small man was the one who always felt the pinch from everything from the beginning of time. Like I always tell my sons, they laugh at me from since Cain licked Abel in his head with a conch shell or whatever he hit him with. Probably not a conch shell, but you know what I mean. It's a Bahamian thing. So yeah, this is not new. Mankind has been corrupt from the very beginning. This is not a 21st century phenomena. Sometimes we look like we want to act like it is. Like, oh, great, finally, laws in place, we're saved. Really? Not really. All right. These are all issues with humankind, and they continue to persist, and they continue to present the same risks as they always have. And unfortunately, the people at the top oftentimes get away far too much, and we keep choking the people at the bottom who steals a loaf of bread, needs money for a lot for gas or whatever. I'm not condoning it. Just saying, like she said, we keep choking the little people to death at the bottom, and the folks, as you move up the line, keep running off with the bacon, getting away.
Mr. Wilkinson,
Yeah.
do you think it's possibly because of the positive, well, how would I want to put that? Like when you look at white collar crime from a larger standpoint, let's just say, let's look at I wouldn't say FTX to the white collar crime, but let's look at a large business where you have some of the shareholders who are arraigned on some charges where they would have laundered some funds, right? Just to say it's a major business. This company employs over 4,000 persons within the country. They provide jobs, they provide insurances, they provide opportunities for over 4,000 staff, right? Do you think it's possible that the law is taking all these things into consideration versus the smaller man where, you know, they get caught stealing, let's just say $1,000 from their place of employment, they want to put them in jail for 6 months versus someone at the top, a CEO, where over 10 years he would have employed 5,000 persons to provide them with job, ways to pay their bills and everything else. Is it possible that they're looking at it from an economical standpoint, which is why it gives the impression that the smaller man is feeling the pinch a lot more than the CEO? I'm not condoning it, but I'm just thinking maybe that's why they always give the CEOs more slaps on the wrist rather than the smaller person.
Well, that's one excuse that we make for allowing them to get away. Notice, see, because here's the problem, Dimitri. I understand what you're saying. Has anybody in this class ever heard about a company called Enron? No?
Yes, sir.
Oh. Enron at one point, many years ago, was considered the largest company in the US, if not in the world. Enron was eventually hit with corruption that destroyed the audit firm of 90 years and caused it to close its doors forever. And the company went into liquidation, never to raise its head again. People lost 30, 20, 30, and 40 years of pension because of the corrupt activity of the senior management of the firm. They employed much more than 5,000 people, yet they went under, as they should have as a result of corruption. Does it ever leave a pretty picture of great taste? No. Should we let the CEOs go because they're heading a big time company that we think is too big to fail? No, because ultimately the long-term effects, which is another kind of risk called strategic risk, is destruction anyway, if not for the company, for the environment in which it operates. That's the problem, Dimitri. Even though we try at the political and economic level to justify it, saying that these guys are running these things, so let's not allow them to go. But put it this way, if they drop dead tomorrow, should the firm close its doors, Dimitri?
No, sir.
No, you're a branch manager, very important job. But I put it to you, if you should be foolish enough to just succumb tonight, you think they're going to stop the branch operation?
No, sir.
No,
Definitely not.
definitely not. So, Lord, poor Mr. Mackey. Anyway, bring in number, who do we have next? And so, yeah, the point is understood, but it's not justifiable. Whenever they commit these crimes, we should treat them as if they dropped dead, quote unquote, and lock them up and bring in number 2372293 to pick it up, just as we always do. But the problem is, Dimitri, that is not the primary reason why they get away, unfortunately. The primary reason why they get away is because there's a lot of collusion and sub-corruption going on within the corruption that allows a certain group of people to vouch for each other, support each other, and pull it off to continue their madness until somebody decides to put a stop to it somewhere. That's the unfortunate part, but that's how it works. Okay? It's just, for example, if you work in compliance, one of you, and you find out that the CEO is laundering money, and you decide to make a report to the board that in your opinion, the CEO is laundering money to the company. Depending on who the relationship between the board member or members and the CEO, they're either going to fire him, bring charges against him, or find a way to deal with you. The only problem is you don't always know what the relationships are. And so now you're doing your job, yet you're running the risk of being fired, or worse, in some countries, taken out. God forbid, can you imagine that? That's how serious it could become in terms of risk-related issues. See my point? That's why we have whistleblowing laws and protections. Anybody knows what whistleblowing is?
Yes, but I don't know if you're really protected.
Well, are we ever really protected? Not really. What is whistleblowing?
I know in some companies, whistleblowing is when you identify a potential risk to the operation, and you would escalate it for review. Now, as far as with staff being protected, I know that it's usually outsourced to an external company, whereas you don't speak to anyone directly, depending on the seriousness of the matter you would have raised, and everything is handled confidentially. So
Yeah, the
persons are involved outside of the country or outside of the company who would handle them.
Yeah, depending on how sophisticated the company's methods are for protecting those, we have anything from total exposure, which is crazy, to total anonymity, like he said, and all kinds of other levels in between. So this thing about whistleblowing is exposing crime and corruption and frauds and money laundering or any other kind of illegal activity that's going on within the firm by anybody at any level. You see, the problem with risk issues is that, for example, many firms and many persons who work in firms think it's okay to blow the whistle and report somebody down the line. They're only a clerk. They're only the cleaner. They're only a middle manager somewhere. I'll expose them. But when we see people doing illegal activity at the senior levels, we have this tendency to be more reluctant to expose them. And so, because of that, in recent years, we've come up with this whistleblowing policy laws in some countries, so that persons who see really serious fraud and illegalities occurring would be able to expose the company without being identified. Because we know, even one of the reasons why thieves don't break in where light is, because even thieves don't want to be identified. They sneak around in the dark. And so organizations have come to the point where persons who need to say that they see wrongdoing going on, we know that if their names are called or they're known, something is going to happen to them by someone, somewhere. All right. So yeah, again, what are these issues? These are all the risk issues that occur, may occur, might occur, have occurred in organizations and will occur in the future. They're not going anywhere. They've been around since the beginning. They're going to be here until the end. Like my grandma used to say, until Christ comes. And there's no doubt about that. History has proven that to be absolutely so. Okay? So you guys are in an environment where all these things are possible. And this particular session is to remind you, and for those of you who, God forbid, may not have been conscious of risk at all for some reason, to let you know that you are definitely in the hornet's nest, whether you realize it or not. Okay, so yeah. And as you can see, the list of risky issues. So far, we've looked at some of the implications of human risk, operational risk, compliance risk. But it doesn't stop there. What about legal risk? What kind of risk is that? Legal risk. Legal risk?
Risk of being sued.
Risk of being sued. Why not? Why not? The risk of being sued. As a matter of fact, anybody who read the paper yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, would have seen that somebody in some political party decided they'd sue their own people because of X, Y, and Z. Anybody saw that? It's not a secret, it was in the paper. Nobody saw that? Man, you guys are busy. Too busy, I think. Nobody saw that lawsuit in the newspaper?
No, I didn't come across it.
Oh, Trinique said she didn't see it. Anybody else not seen it? No?
Also,
No.
I can be honest, I saw the papers yesterday, but I get so much right now, I didn't read it.
Yes, she said, I saw it, but man, I wish I had time to be bothered with the details. Point well taken, absolutely. All right. Some I have days like that too. Some days I get the newspaper in the morning, and by the time the day is over, it's still folded. I haven't opened it yet. And I'm thinking, man, at my age, I'm far too busy. How the hell haven't seen the paper yet for the day? That's crazy. That's that's total madness. I'm at this stage of my life, I should be able to open the paper first thing in the morning, put my foot up on the desk like on TV, and read the paper first. But anyway, the point is, a local political party is having a rift. The leader of the party and the deputy leader, for whatever reason, decided it was not a good idea for their vice chairman to be in meetings anymore. I guess they feel they can no longer trust that person. And so they barred that person from the meetings. The vice chairman of the group got upset and filed a petition to the court saying that they have no right in the constitution of that party to bar him from meetings as vice chairman. The court ruled in his favor. And so they can't stop him at the moment from going into the meeting. Why they didn't want him there, whether he was considered double agent, whether they lost trust for some reason, that's another matter, but the court's not concerned about those details. The court is only concerned about the legality of whether they have the right to bar him from the meeting or not. So where's the risk in that? You be my guest. And my point is, somebody might actually say, well, I don't even get it about risk. That's a court matter. That is naivety concerning the nature of risk. And that's why so many people get caught, because they don't even really recognize and understand the nature of risk. Sometimes it is obvious, and sometimes it is what we call subtle. Subtle.
Mr. Wilkerson, did you see the story with Michael Irvin where he was falsely accused by the staff of the Marriott hotel brand, and he actually lost one of his jobs, and he's now suing the entire brand for $100 million
Sounds good to
based
me.
on what his staff would have, based on what the staff would have done.
Yeah, sounds good to me, especially if he has a case. Okay, so again, but that's legal risk, not for him, but for who? The company that he is?
The brand, the brand.
Brand. See my point? And that's where the issue of legal risk comes in. And so when companies are taking action against people or entities, you just cannot take an action just because you feel you're so big and powerful, or nobody can bother you because of whatever the reason. If you're thinking like that, then you're not considering legal risk. And therefore, maybe those executives should be in this class to be reminded. Not that they don't know, they just need reminding. And sometimes even after reminding, we still don't consider the risk because we think we're too rich, we're too powerful, we're too influential to be impacted by any consideration of risk. We can take the risk and get away with it whenever we bloody well like. So big companies and people think. Of course, if we're little people like us, we can't be that foolish. We have to think about everything before we act, because we cannot afford the headache and the cost of making a risk issue mistake. Okay, so welcome to the real world, legal risk. See all that came out of the legal risk definition? And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Those same two examples, the brand and the party. The list is a long one that goes on as we speak. Okay? Companies are facing these kinds of risks everywhere. Let's not forget strategic risk, not planning for the long term, not thinking about the long term, not thinking about the impact of our decisions on the long term. Let me ask you guys something about strategic risk. Does anybody have access to Google?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I do. I hope everybody has access to Google. In the old days, when I was a youngster, like some of you guys, I didn't have access to Google. I had to go to the library or consult an encyclopedia or something like that. We didn't have the luxury of just typing stuff in. You had to walk or drive to a location to get the information if we didn't have it in our homes. So somebody please type in strategic risk in Google for me. Tell us what it means. Strategic risk.
Strategic risk refers to the internal and external events that may make it difficult or even impossible for an organization to achieve their objectives and strategic goals. These risks can have severe consequences that impact organizations in the long term.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chandris. Big companies like Enron and others, those of you may have been reading a little bit, God forbid, in your busy schedule, saying that some 1 or 2 major banks in the Silicon Valley in California went under for some reason again. The only problem is these big banks keep going under. Nobody says where the money is gone, but it's gone to someone or some group of people. Did you know that? When banks fail, it isn't just that the money disappears into thin air. Did you guys know that? Probably not. You think it just disappeared into thin air? Oh, it failed. Let's move on. Nobody stops to ask where did the money go that disappeared? Hmm.
Mr. Wilkinson, I have a question.
Candace.
I hear you talking about Enron, and that's good in the United States. We know, like you said, that was a big one. But when we think about here locally in the Bahamas, do we think we have any miniature Enrons right here?
Yes, we do.
Sometimes my heart goes out to people who I know that would have invested all of their funds for years. You remember with City Market and that pension fund,
Of course,
and to this day, you know.
Candace, not only do I remember, but I'm so happy to hear that another soul in the Commonwealth remembers, other than the people impacted. Because other than the people impacted, nobody seems to give a damn, in my opinion. And I say that unequivocally, by the way, because I'm old enough to say it. I don't have to worry. My children are grown up now. I don't have to worry about stuff you guys have to worry about. I could say anything I want, so to speak. But yeah, you're right. The city market thing. And the question is, that's one of our local examples. And the question is, Candace, why the hell is it taking so long to resolve the issue and give those poor, hardworking people their money? I can't seem to get anybody to answer that question. And every now and then, if I'm in a certain group and I ask it, they look at me like I'm an alien. Like, who the hell are you and why are you so interested? Mr. Who the hell are you? Kind of thing. But yes, thank you, Candace, for being bold enough to raise a local Enron issue that continues to sit for years and years. Okay? Let's not forget, Candace, since we're talking about real life behemoth examples on risk. See, risk. Notice I don't have this crap in my note, not crap, you know what I mean, in my notes, because academically, we just discussed the romantic side, like the academic version. It is up to us to be able to connect it to the real versions. And then once we know how to connect it, what are we going to do about fixing it? Therein lies the real problem. Nobody cares if you hear it. Nobody even cares if you understand it. The problem comes if you seek to fix it. Now that's a whole other kind of risk. So yeah, the city market thing is definitely a local example. Then there's the example, Candace, of the blue buildings debacle. Remember the blue buildings? Which company had blue buildings in the Bahamas a couple of years ago? But you can always identify the company by the blue buildings they had in different locations.
Not too certain.
Clico?
Say it again?
Not Clico?
Clico.
Oh, well, I was going to mention Clico because I'm still waiting on my funds.
I know you're one of the soul sufferers, correct? Thank you, Paula. Clico. Clico. Nobody, like City Market, is even talking about Clico anymore. Except when somebody gets up screaming somewhere and said, what about our money? Every blue moon now. Why not? See, risk. And speaking about real life Bahamian risks, you see, it's easy to talk about other people's risk, Chinese risk, American risk, European risk, and all that. Let's talk about ours. We're talking about ours. In fact, what we're talking about is equally as important as anything that's in your notes. That's why I'm taking a moment to talk about it, because you could always read your notes and connect the dots. It's this discussion that's important to make the risk issues come alive. I have a question for you guys on Clico, especially those of you who had an investment in Clico. See, investment. Anybody remembers anymore how much money left the country? Was it like $5,000? No, see, we either don't know, don't remember, or it's vague now all of a sudden. Can somebody type in Google how
I
much,
think it was about 30 million or more.
much more than 30 million? Type it in Google and see if something comes up. That would be interesting. How much money was sent out of the Bahamas by Clico? Type that in. Tell me what you get.
$1.6 billion.
Excuse me? How did you know?
Google.
No, that ain't real. $1.6 billion.
Candace, is that what Google said? Clico
Please
now.
double check that. $1.6 billion pay him in investments.
Miguel. Miguel is in on the risk discussion. Yeah. Check.
No, it can't be. It can't be. That can't be.
Well, let's see. What does
$1.6 billion?
what does Google say? We'll see in a moment what Google says. Google is not always correct, but let's see what it says. Candace, anybody? What does Google say about it?
Clico.
How much left on to Clico?
Yeah, sorry, I had the button to this one. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, I got a call, but yeah, it was something I got on my phone. I'm trying to get back there
Okay.
where I saw that.
If it's okay if your colleagues help you, other people can type it in too.
I'm getting 35 million.
Okay, 35 million. That's one number. Getting warm. Anybody got another number? Dimitri, where'd you get 35 million from?
Sorry, that's saying 35 million to make the victims whole. I see there at the Tribune did a recent story about it, so I'm still reading through it.
Yeah, 35 million is only to make people whole. That's not what was sent. The amount that was sent is greater than 35 million. 35 million is what is needed to make Candace and company whole. The investors in Clico. Anybody found another number? How much was sent out by Clico? Now we run the risk of not even finding the information. How about that? We could find out what happened to Enron and WorldCom in the world, but we can't find out what happened with and Google with Vico. How come? How come it's taking us so long? It shouldn't just pop up?
Yeah, I see something else here. July 31st, 2016.
Okay.
This is now talking about $5.2 billion in the national insurance scheme that was lost.
No. That's only the NIB investment. So now can just your little itsy bitsy investment you're waiting for, compare that to the NIB loss. No wonder rates are going up. Sorry, I'm just trying to make it as real as possible because it's important for you to get the academic side, which is will be discussed in our notes, but there's a real side as well. This one, we can't find the information right away. See how much searching around, we still don't know what it is. Nobody say you can't find it. X amount was sent out by Clico. You can't find it like that. It might be there, but it's not glaring. Well, let me just say this. It is estimated that some 35 million is needed to make investors whole, but it's believed that some 70 to 80 million dollars was sent out altogether. Okay, students? Yeah. As a result of that, just like Enron and WorldCom, Clico had to close its doors because its resources were gone. It had nothing else to operate with.
Yeah, I see that here. 73 million went into an investment for Wellington Persevere investment, some residential subdivision.
Yeah, that's the amount that went into that investment. We've heard nothing about anymore. That's not all of it.
No, because as of what they're saying at 2020, 2021, They had allocated 7.4 million to pay out CLICO's policyholders. That's the most recent one I see.
That's only trying to keep people. That's not the amount of money that left the country.
I'm saying here where Clico was also, they were also located in other Caribbean countries as well.
It
It
was
wasn't
sent,
just the Bahamas.
no, it was sent out of the Bahamas to another location in the Caribbean. Now, let me just say this. Since Candace raised the question of, do we have any local enrons? She opened the bag, and as you can see, careful when you open the bag, because all of a sudden you discover some things that you may not even have been aware of in the bloody bag. So now we have a couple of things that have come up so far, including City Market, Clico. People at City Market are waiting for their money that they put into the company, their own personal money that should have been in trust anyway, should not have been in City Market to be sitting around for them to play with. Now they're suffering the consequences of it. And then we have Clico, $70 to $80 million sent out somewhere to another Clico somewhere or somewhere. The question is for you guys, you young professionals of the future, who agreed for that money to leave this country? Anybody knows? Let's talk risk. Who agreed to that? We don't know, do we?
It would have to have been the central bank, or the government, because I know even with the Enron, the SEC was also identified as a contributing partner to that company, because they were supposed to be regulating them and they were allowing them to actually get away with a lot of stuff they shouldn't have been. So something with that funds that size, I'm pretty sure the central bank and the government had to have been involved.
Thank you, Dimitri. Without a doubt. And even at the central bank level that has to finally process it. See, let's be clear. The governor of the central bank and the central bank is responsible for the operational and regulatory side of things. Who gave the instruction for the money to leave? And why? Why would we let all the money go without keeping the money that we needed to keep for investors to be satisfied? Anybody knows that answer? Let's talk risk. Even if you're sending money out for some God-forsaken reason, why would you not keep the amount that's required to make good for the investors in reserve in case something goes wrong and what we call financial risk? Nobody's having that discussion. Nobody's come up with a justifiable answer. In fact, nobody's even discussing Clico except a few hardworking sufferers who continue to wait for their few $1,000s that they've lost, plus the millions that have been lost by NIB and other institutional and other investors in the Commonwealth. Okay. All right, so a word to the wise is sufficient in terms of bringing this issue of risk home. I just want you to be clear that while we're discussing risk identification and mitigation and analysis and assessment and all that academically, that there is a reality to this whole thing to which these concepts apply. And those realities have significant financial, legal, compliance, and moral implications, whether you are aware of it or not. And many of you young professionals will be confronted. Some of you may miss the whole thing, just retire without saying any of this crazy stuff. Thank God I'm old and retired. But some of you may not miss it. And if you do run into it, you will have decisions to make. That's why we have a risk section in this session. So you cannot say that you were not told about this very important side of the business. All right. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for throwing out those very important issues, not only to remind yourself about the nature of risk, but for your colleagues in this room who may not even have been aware of it at all. Now they are a little bit more enlightened thanks to this discussion. Don't presume that the risk list stops there. There are many other types of risks, and we might say a couple more before we're done. Okay. All right. So last week, then, oh darn it, those are some serious issues that came up. I didn't say anything about resolve. I'm not saying anything about that risk today. I think we are burdened enough by City Market, CLICO, and so on. But if anybody's interested in discussion on resolve, and you remind me next week, I'll say something about the risk issues connected there too. All right. So we left off on page 6, I believe. Last time we were looking at risk issues. We were looking at how to go about evaluating risk and how to go about making decisions within the organization with regards to certain types of risks. And those examples we talked about had the persons involved, whether it's at the regulatory level, political level, organizational level, or otherwise, had they considered some of these very same things we're talking about, maybe certain things may not have happened, but not guaranteed. Because remember, there's a risk that we don't have even in the academic text. It's called moral risk. That's one that I've made up myself. Anybody has an idea what I mean by moral risk? Moral. It's a word we don't even use anymore. Can somebody put moral in Google and tell me what that means? Not me, us. Moral. Type that in Google and tell us what it means.
Concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior.
Excuse me, say it again.
Concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior.
Doggone it, Shanique. Okay? The principles associated with right and wrong behavior, which means if I create my own category of risk called moral risk, what am I saying? Anyone?
Like the integrity of the company.
Yeah, that if we don't do the right things, we run the risk of making what? Immoral decisions or wrong decisions, which can have implications as we've seen for organizations on the whole, countries even. I wouldn't talk about individually. Okay? So yeah, having knowledge of how to evaluate risk and whether to accept it or treat it, that's important. But we also need not forget the moral risk factor. Let's not forget, no matter what we do, we have to consider what is right and what is wrong for the organization as a whole. If it's country risk, for the country as a whole. If it's individual risk, as an individual as a whole. If it's family risk, the family as a whole. All right. All right. So picking up on page 7 then. Once we've done this evaluation, decided, okay, how are we going to treat it? How are we going to accept it? How are we going to deal with it? We now have the other problem of communicating the risk, which is a whole, I mean, I can spend the rest of the day and next week just talking about how to communicate this risk. Okay. But for the sake of what we have, let me say that risk communication and reporting falls into 2 categories, as you can see. One are the internal reporting and communication groups and the external reporting and communication groups. Now, can somebody tell us which reporting items fall under internal reporting? There are 3 of them. Page 7 in your notes. There are 3 of them: internal reporting and communicating. Which
the board of directors, business units, and individuals.
And what are the external reporting groups?
A company needs to report to its stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I see, the stakeholders.
Okay,
This-
what are they reporting?
This is page 7 in the book.
Yeah, page 7.
Page 7. Which chapter?
This module
Uh,
3.
uh, Module
Module
3?
three.
Module three.
Okay, yeah, so that was in there last week. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to report to the stakeholders. What are they reporting?
Um,
What are they reporting on a regular basis?
risk management policies and the effectiveness in achieving its objectives.
Thank you very much. Now, here's why I put you through that little piece right there. Oftentimes, we have information, for example, like a suspicious transaction or something to blow the whistle on or whatever the case might be, but we don't report it for whatever reason. Okay? And so the fact that we're required to report risk issues and communicate them to the board, that doesn't mean that we always do that. The job of compliance and risk is to report these things to the board when they see them. They should be doing it. Doesn't always happen sometimes. Sometimes even compliance, depending on the organization, may refrain from doing it because they feel if they report it, then the board will come after them for exposing it at all. In other words, you need to know when to open your mouth and when not to, even though you're required to open it when required. But on paper, risk issues should be reported to the board. It should be reported to all business units, and it should be reported to all persons in the organization as it relates to the organization. That is much more difficult in practice than it is on paper. But it is not impossible. Some firms, some people do not conduct the internal reporting process appropriately because on purpose, not because the organization does not have the resources to do it. People hide information, CEOs hide information from boards. Boards and CEOs hide information from business units. Business units, boards, and CEOs hide information from staffers, depending on what's going on. And anytime we don't report in these categories appropriately, we put the company at risk. And we see that happening all the time. Compliance doesn't report to the board that the policies and procedures are not in place. The inspectors come in, find that it's not in place, and the company gets fined. In the Bahamas, it's a couple of bucks compared to the world. In the world, you get fined anywhere from 5 to 10 million to millions of dollars, tens of millions, just for not having a proper policy and procedures in place and up to date. In the Bahamas, we've still been fairly nice about it. We just find you a couple of bucks here and there at the moment. This thing about risk reporting and communication is not automatic, but it is required. It is not consistent, but it is necessary. And the firms that want to govern themselves appropriately will follow the rules, but not everybody follows the rules. But we're here to find out what the rules are. Now, how well they're followed in the firm or organization you work, that's a whole other matter. And if you're involved directly in ensuring that this happens, dog eat your lunch, because that is a bigger job than it appears on this piece of paper. Let me ask this question for anyone. With regards to external reporting, who do we mean by stakeholders? Anyone? Who do we mean by stakeholders? Who are they?
The clients and the investors.
Clients and investors, they're definitely stakeholders. Is that it? Is that it? Clients and investors?
Employees, customers, suppliers.
Employees, suppliers, anybody else is a stakeholder? What about creditors? Who are creditors? Who are creditors? Anyone?
Wouldn't they fall under suppliers?
No. Suppliers are a completely different group. They're also known as vendors. But who are creditors?
Creditors is persons who the company would owe money to.
Yeah, that's the Meaching company. He's trying to hide behind something, but creditors are lenders. For those of you, been aware of that before, creditors are lenders, and Dimitri works for a creditor. So if anybody, I'm going to put in a marketing thing for you, Dimitri. Anybody needs a loan, go to Dimitri. He's in your class. All right, but creditors are lenders. They are also stakeholders. Why are creditors stakeholders? Why should they be given information about the risk facing the firm? Why should we not lie to creditors as a firm? I think somebody's mic is open.
You'll run risk for borrowing in the future.
Say it again.
You'll run the risk of borrowing in the future. So
Yeah, she's getting warm. You run the risk of not being able to borrow in the future. How come? Why is she getting warm? Why is that a risk? Risk of not reporting to your creditors.
Well, your creditors have a right to know, because if they are investing and you are providing you with funds, they have a right to get an understanding of your true financial position. So you can't give them false information or receive funds from a creditor based on false financial information. That's illegal.
You can, but it's not, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
We know people lie all the time. When I say people lie, I don't mean all people lie. We know that those who lie, lie. There's always a group somewhere who lie about what's going on in their firm or otherwise. So yeah, it's important that creditors, along with other stakeholders, told the truth about what's going on in the firm. If the firm is facing any significant risk of some kind, they're one of the first people they should tell are their creditors, except the creditors tend sometimes to be the last people to know until loan payments stop coming in. Okay? The reason why I know that was because many, many decades ago, I used to be a loan manager at that same bank here at Dimitri. Okay? And so I've done my share of mortgage loans and consumer loans and commercial loans to last a bloody lifetime. And so there's nothing under the sun that I've not seen that affects the creditor. But organizations, even then and even now, when they run into trouble, even though they have borrowing facilities with creditors, they do not come up front oftentimes and tell their creditor as a stakeholder that they're running into trouble and what the trouble is. In fact, oftentimes creditors never find out until the creditor loan payments run into trouble. They stop coming. They're on and off. They stop completely, whatever the case might be. And then the creditor seeks to get information. Then they discover that the company is facing certain types of risks that is impacting their ability to repay that loan. So yeah, these are the stakeholders that need to be communicated to when we're dealing with risk. So a lot of things involved in this stuff, whether you're aware of it or not, that impact what goes on from day to day. And how well we manage these risk issues will determine how successful we are in getting these jobs done and getting our money back if we're a creditor and not running into legal trouble and compliance issues and so on. What about the government? Is the government a stakeholder anyway?
Yes.
Yeah, the government is a stakeholder, a major stakeholder. Should we lie to the government? about our,
Sometimes.
should we lie to the government? Just yes or no. If you think yes, just say yes. Should we lie to the government of any country?
No,
No. Do we?
you ask, do we?
We shouldn't, but do we?
When you say we, you mean as a people or you mean as a company?
As a company or as a people? Remember now, I'm not talking about everyone, just those who do. Do we?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We do. Not all of us. See, let's not mix it up. Not all of us do, but those of us who do, whether it's company-wide, individually, country-wise, or otherwise. Even countries lie to other countries, don't they? Absolutely. Interestingly enough, I accidentally ran into an interview that an Indian lady was having with Bill Gates. Anybody knows Bill Gates?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Yeah, we do. And she was saying to Bill Gates, Mr. Gates, you were talking about very interest in the Indian people and all that. Can you explain, elaborate more? And here's Bill Gates. Well, I just want to say that I'm very happy that despite the chaotic situation in a country like India, they are still a democracy, and I'm happy to see that they get to make free choices. Oh, it's very nice, Mr. Gates. Tell us though, then what is it about the health and care and welfare of the Indian people? What are your thoughts on that? Here's Bill Gates. Well, we all know that India has one of the biggest populations in the world, and we're just always looking for ways to ensure the health and welfare of people, the Indians included. Anybody knows, is that the truth from Bill Gates? Truth or fiction? Because behind your answer is a risk issue, whether you know it or not. Is that the truth what Bill Gates said? Is he really interested in what happens to the people of India? Uh, I know it sounds like a trick question, but it isn't. It's a risk question. I'm just showing you that risk doesn't only exist in the organization that you work at, the one you're going to on Monday, or for some of you, today and tomorrow. Well, enlightenment on risk, just to show you that risk goes beyond your organizational borders. Anybody who's done any research or know anything about Bill Gates and his agenda outside of Microsoft knows that many years ago, Bill Gates made a statement that the world is already overpopulated and something has to be done to depopulate it. Some people feel that COVID-19 was orchestrated to help to assist Bill Gates and company. Another theory with their depopulation agenda and their sterilization agenda of some of these countries that can't seem to stop having children. Well, we don't have time in this year to discuss the risk associated with that. I'm just letting you know that not everything you hear is what you think it is when it comes to risk issues. A word to the wise is still sufficient. All right, so what were we talking about? Stakeholders, yes. The government indeed is a stakeholder as well. We shouldn't lie to the government. Whatever the government needs to know, we need to tell them, but we know organizations don't tell governments everything. They hide stuff for one reason or another. They even hide about what they pay for VAT, talking about other issues. That's why they get on the audit department at VAT is on the tier now, checking companies to see if they're telling the truth on their VAT returns. And the reason why we have audit companies because we can't trust companies to tell the truth on their own. Otherwise, we would need audit departments. True or false, if that was an exam question. What would you put, true or false?
Could you repeat the question?
We know, for example, that the government is conducting audits to see if companies are conducting VAT as we speak, whether you are aware of it or not. We know that many companies are not declaring the proper VAT amount. Should they be lying to the government about their VAT?
No,
No, they,
No,
they
the answer should be no. But we know why some companies don't tell the truth about their VAT, because they're trying to, quote unquote, save money that isn't theirs. That's the other problem, because collecting VAT is not the company's money, correct?
Correct.
Okay. A lot of things underlying risk issues. But what's the risk of not declaring your correct VAT amount? Any risk there?
yes, you can be fined, your business license can be revoked. A lot of risk.
Indeed. And they might even, if they're really feeling froggy, find some criminal charges that they, well, how about that? Another local Bohemian example. So we're not exempt from the world's madness, are we? No, we are not. So yes, the government is a stakeholder. Okay? I hope I have at least raised your awareness between all of this academic stuff that we're looking at on paper. Don't get me wrong, the paper stuff is important. The paper stuff does relate to what we're talking about. It's just important to have both so you can make the necessary connections. All right. Paula, did you read last week? Paula,
yes,
did you read last week?
I was here last week.
I know. Did you read?
I didn't get much reading in.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, did you read to us as a class?
As a class,
Yeah, did I ask you to read last week to us?
no.
Okay, lovely. I was just trying to make sure I didn't call you last week and then pick on you again today. All right, Paula, so why don't we go then to page 7 under risk treatment? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just begin reading under risk treatment? What is that all about? Treating risk?
Okay. Risk treatment is the process of selecting and implementing measures to modify the risk. Risk treatment includes as its major elements risk control mitigation, but extends further to risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk financing, etc. Note, risk financing refers to the mechanism, example, insurance programs, for funding the financial consequences of risk. Risk financing is not generally considered to be the provision of funds to meet the cost implementing risk treatment.
Notice what she's saying before she goes on. All the things that should go under treatment. It's like when you go to a doctor and say something is hurting, something is bleeding, something isn't working properly. The doctor says, okay, first of all, I need to diagnose the problem if they could, because they can't always diagnose it. Which we've done so far. That's all that evaluation stuff we did so far, and all this trying to diagnose the problem. Once we diagnose the problem, then the doctor will say, okay, in my experience and training, I have to come up with the appropriate treatment. Now, sometimes some of them come up with an appropriate treatment that works, and sometimes some of them come up with a treatment that does not work. But that does not work thing is a whole other issue. That's a whole other risk issue. Okay, same thing happens when we're treating risk in the firm. There are a lot of things we need to consider, just like the doctor. If you run into a doctor that just looks at one treatment method, you have a problem. Maybe you need to not, tell them you have a meeting to go to and not go back there. But certainly when you're looking at treatment, you have to look at all the possible treatment elements. In this case, you look at how we control risk in our organization. Do we have any mitigation things in place like insurance or policies and procedures, etc.? Do we have any kind of things in place to avoid risk from happening in the first place? Like if we see it coming, report it so we don't have to deal with it at all. If we have it already in place, how can we?
Yeah, you making a mess? Okay. What you doing? Okay.
Sophia,
Sorry.
it's okay. It's a good thing you didn't say anything untoward, like, let me see what that can be. All right.
My apologies. I'm multitasking here.
It is absolutely no problem whatsoever. That's one of the beauties of a virtual education. You can get important stuff and change a pamper. How's that? All right. So all of these kinds of elements we have to look at when we're looking at treating our risk. Can we even transfer it? Like, for example, if somebody gets married and then they discover later on that they married a serial killer, can you transfer that risk? Anyone? You discover somebody you married a serial killer. What do you do with that risk?
Put them on a date with your cousin.
So, put them on a what? Say it again. Say it again. A person said that and ran away. What was that, Dimitri? Dimitri said it.
I was saying, sorry, I was trying to unmute. I was saying you set them up on a date with your cousin.
Oh, your cousin? But you're married. That's not gonna work. Can that work? I know. That's one option. What happens if that doesn't work, Dimitri? You're still married to the serial killer who jumps in the same bed with you every night. But now you know something different. You have evidence that they are a serial killer. What do you do with that risk?
Transfer to the police.
Transfer to police with the hope that the police will arrest them immediately?
I hope so.
Suppose the police say there's nothing we can do. We don't have any evidence. Now they know you know.
Well, listen, Bahamas, he probably can make bail, so I wouldn't say transfer to the police right away.
So now you can see that treating risk is not as simple as we think. Okay, there you go. All right. And again, also, some people think that treating risk is just putting enough money aside, and if something happens, you have the money to cover it. It's not that simple. That's why we have insurance. Some people don't believe in insurance. They're like, I don't need insurance. I'll just put $500 a month aside, and if I need something, then I'll pay in cash. That's if something minor happens. What happens if you need a transplant? Oh, chemotherapy. Oh my God. When are you going to save enough money for that crap? So it's not just a matter of putting money aside. Unless you're a multi-billion-dollar company, you can put millions and millions aside. Okay, keep going, Paula. You started this. Keep going. Risk treatment.
Monitoring and review of the risk management process. Effective risk management requires a reporting and review structure to ensure that risks are effectively identified and assessed, and that appropriate controls and responses are in place. Regular audits of policy and standards compliance should be carried out and standards performance reviewed to identify opportunities for improvement.
Keep going.
The structure and administration of risk management. The risk management policy, board involvement, business units, primary control of risk, resources and implementation, and the role of internal audit.
Thank you very much, Paula. So you see, she had some interesting things to say about what kinds of elements are involved in treating risk. And then we find out that there's something else involved in treating risk, and that has to do with how we manage risk. Same thing with the serial killer in your bed. How do you manage that? Do you just put plastic over their head and end it and see if you can get away with it? God forbid. Do you report it to the police, who might say we don't have enough evidence? Now the person knows you know, puts you in jeopardy. So this thing can get anywhere from simple to completely weird and dangerous, even within organizations. Okay? When companies put employees' pension funds into their own personal, into the company's account, that is a risk. That's why the city market people cannot get their money. had the company put the money into a trust fund that is separate and apart and independently run from the company, those employees would not have this problem today. Which means that it's interesting from a risk perspective why there's been no legislation making it mandatory for companies to place pension funds within a pension trust and making it illegal to keep it within the confines of the company itself. Maybe I'm just the only genius in the room, but it doesn't seem too difficult to me. If we really want to protect the investment of people, especially the hard-working little people like plumbers, teachers, police, yard cleaning people, cashiers in the food store, regular hardworking folk. Do we really want to protect their money? And if we do, why don't we make it so? So we don't even have to have this discussion about city market. Furthermore, pension funds should be regulated, meaning they should be providing not only money going into a separate trust fund, but the trust should be providing monthly reports to the relevant regulatory agency to ensure that even they could it be that I'm the only genius in the room? The answer to that is no. It is not rocket science. Welcome to risk. Treatment has to do with having the will to do it as well. And one of the things that Paula said in terms of the will to treat is how we manage the risk. We need a reporting and review structure. If you're not checking people, sooner or later something is going to go to hell. No matter what capacity, organization-wide, church-wide, country-wide, household-wide, whatever it is. Just like she said here, if there's nothing in place to review it and ensure that things are working the way they should, sooner or later, without the appropriate controls in place, something is going to go awry. I always tease my wife, she practices her own risk management. She doesn't even know it. Here's what she does. Let me see if you guys can pick it up. She still says, sweetheart, what time will you be home today? No, sweetheart, what time will you be getting off today? Why is that maybe risk management, anyone? What is she checking on? Come on, come out the box. What is she checking on?
To see what time you'll be home.
Now she knows I'm usually home at a certain time every day, typically, but she will still inquire. Why do you think she's doing that, Dimitri?
To make sure you don't pop up unexpectedly.
Or I don't have any what? Unusual plans. So in other words, whether she realizes it or not, she's actively what? Monitoring and checking to make sure that the program remains the way she's accustomed to it being. And if more organizations do that, we might have less problems. But a lot of times nobody is really checking stuff until something explodes. And then suddenly we're running around trying to figure out who to blame and whose fault it is and who will take the blame. Notice what Paula said, in certain organizations, if not more of them, regular audits of the policy and standards should be conducted. And always we should be looking for opportunities to improve the process. In other words, it's an ongoing process. It's not an annual process and every 3 to 5 years, 7 years. No, it's an ongoing process, especially risk. Risk is an ongoing daily thing. Once we really understand what's going on and how serious it is. And organizations will find that they'll have lesser problems if they implement some of these very simple steps Doesn't have to get even sophisticated, just simple steps. Monitor and control and check on a regular basis. So, as she said, Paula, the way to do this is to set up a structure. Okay? That's why my wife could ask me because she knows I have a structure. I have a program that she's accustomed to. And so she just checks it to make sure that I'm operating according to the program. And if something is going to change, I'm sure she has a follow-up question as to why and what happened. Same thing should happen in organizations. Now I could say, I'm a doggone grown man. I don't need to. No. Demetri, are you married?
Yes, sir.
Oh, how long have you been married?
6 years.
Only 6, you're still on honeymoon. Okay, you don't count. But you'll find out eventually how all this comes. When I say you don't count, I mean 6 years is not a long time yet. Okay? But you're on your way. For some people, 6 years is a lifetime already. They don't get anywhere near that. So good stuff, good luck. You must be doing something right so far. Have you identified any potential risks since you started this class, Dimitri? It's not a
Just
trick.
just financial risk from Shein, Amazon, and Zara.
Yeah, financial risk from Amazon and who? Yes, yes.
And
Uh,
Shein, Amazon, and Zara.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being so candid about it. Uh, it is a real risk, whether we say it humorously or not. They have conducted many, many studies, past and present. And today, one of the biggest problems that married people face, they say, is financial. Okay? One of the biggest reasons for divorces and discord is financial. So financial risk is very real, not just for organizations, but everyone. Imagine that. So structure is always good. In our discussions, the best kind of structure to make your administration of risk work is this. Create a policy. Put the policy in writing. Make sure that the board is involved. So they cannot say they didn't know and therefore they couldn't take action to fix anything. They should be the first to know. Whoever creates the policy, the board should not only get it, but they should sign off on it. Any board that doesn't want to sign up on a risk policy is suspect. How do you deal with a board that doesn't want to sign off? That's another problem, which is another risk. But let us assume for the sake of simplicity that most boards are in agreement with signing off. Then the policy, after the board is signed off, should be sent out to who needs to know. All the subsidiaries, all the branches, all of those persons who are in control of risk issues, and that happens to be everyone. Everybody has a responsibility for risk, from the janitor all the way up. And then, wherever resources are needed, they should be provided. You can't tell people to mitigate risk if you don't provide them the resources, the people and the money, whatever, to do it. And then after doing all this stuff, none of it matters unless you implement. Does anybody in this class know what implement means? What does implement means? It's a 2-letter word. Simple. What does implement mean? 2 letters. Starts with D.
Do?
Do. See that? It's not even complicated. But you'll discover, like many other things, risk included, risk issues, DO is not as simple as you think. DO. Simply do it. Just like the old expression we used to use, just say no. As simple as that is, people are still going to prison and murdering each other just because they will not say no. People are putting their companies at risk, executives and senior management and boards and others, just because they wouldn't say no. to corruption. GO. That's what Paula meant by implementation, even though she may not have realized it at the time, reading it. And then for those organizations that are really feeling froggy, remember that word? Slow word. Do we use froggy anymore? If you're feeling froggy. No? The other item to consider is the role of the internal audit. My question to you, young professionals, why should we consider an internal audit when we're dealing with risk management and its structure? Why should we consider internal audit? Anyone?
To ensure your business is compliant, to make sure that no rules and regulations are being broken, whether willingly or unknowing or unwillingly. To ensure you avoid any fines, any negative reputational risk, operational risk. So internal audits are very important to make sure that the business is on track, not just for today, but to ensure that the presence and your presence is in the country or in the business for the future as well.
Absolutely. And make no mistake about it. This role of the internal audit is, as he said, to monitor the policy and the process to make sure things go the way they should, and where they're not going, to take steps to fix them. Because most of what we do have some kind of risk attached to it. He named some of them. One of them being operational risk, the other one being reputational risk, and there are a whole string of other risks connected to this process. So when your internal auditors come snooping around, don't panic and don't get upset. They're doing a very peculiar job that is good for the organization, particularly from a risk-based approach, by all means. All right, so if we look at page 9, then at the top, I have a little diagram there with risk in the middle. And this whole thing is about what goes on when we seek to identify and analyze and apply certain techniques to mitigating risk and evaluate them and treat them and set up structures to manage them, etc. See, it all comes together. These techniques and rules and processes are not in silos and exist among themselves individually. They're all interconnected. It's just that organizations oftentimes don't interconnect them. They either treat them as individual units or don't deal with them at all until something happens. But they're all interconnected. So when we look at risk in the middle, whatever that risk is in the organization, okay, we have to ask ourselves, what 4 things that we should always be considering? If you have a risk management department, if you have middle and senior management people, if you have persons that are responsible for the day-to-day, these are the kinds of things that should be in their minds. This is why it's important for organizations to have individuals throughout the organization do courses like this, and certainly risk-related courses and programs so that they can get some insight at all levels. Because see, sometimes we think, and sometimes firms make us believe that the responsibility for risk lies only at the top. I hope I have discarded that notion already. Risk applies to everyone, just like compliance, just like suspicious transactions. Everybody has a responsibility to report if they see a risk issue at hand. Okay, so what do we think about when we see risk? Period. We have to say, no matter what level it is, should we accept this, especially the senior level? Should we accept this risk? Should we somehow avoid this risk if we could? If it's possible, can we avoid it? If we can't avoid it, can we reduce it? Or better still, can we somehow transfer it out of our hair altogether? Now, many of us like to take what we call the easy route, look for a way to transfer the risk. But it's not always possible to do that. And sometimes it's not even always practical to seek to transfer it. But if you can come up with a transfer of risk that can work for your organization, by all means, give it a shot. However, typically most of us are stuck with the other three: accepting it, avoiding it if we could, or somehow, God forbid, reducing it. Okay? And so what do we do about this? We consider one of the most important risk management tools in the market, and that is called insurance. Now, this thing about insurance for entities and companies and organizations has all kinds of implications. I mean, you can actually buy insurance for almost anything in the world, including what we now call crypto insurance. Imagine that. Anybody heard about the FTX matter in the Bahamas? I'm the only one who heard about FTX in the Bahamas.
Yes, read about it.
Yeah. What did you hear?
They didn't have any compliance controls, proper compliance controls.
No, they didn't have any proper compliance control. What else happened with FTX? Anybody remembers?
Misappropriation of customers' funds and investments. And when it came time to pay those back, the company was at a short when it came to liquid assets, which forced the company, I guess, to foreclosure.
Yeah, kind of in a nutshell, word got out that there was misappropriation of investor funds by FTX. When word got out, other investors started to panic and withdraw their monies from the blockchain, those who could get it quickly. Many did not get their money in time. By the time they tried to get it, the company was already shut down and going into liquidation. And so now it is out of business completely. And so the world, including the Bahamas, is trying to find all the money they possibly can in order to satisfy those investments to the greatest possible degree. Something like CLECO. Will all the investors get all their money back? No, and hell no. We don't even know where some of the money is. We found some in the Bahamas, in the US, in Hong Kong, in the BVI, and all kinds of places known and no doubt unknown. Welcome to risk. Now the question is, whose fault was it for allowing FTX to run rampant with investment money? Not that this is new. Companies have been abusing investment money for decades, centuries to some extent, but certainly in the 20th century and so far in the 21st century, the greatest abuse ever. Who was responsible for monitoring FTX and mitigating that risk to the greatest possible extent? Anybody knows? In the Bahamas, that is.
Could you repeat the question?
Who was responsible for monitoring FTX?
The Securities Commission, I think it was.
Did they succeed or fail?
I would say they failed.
Yeah. To the extent required, the general belief is that they failed in that area. They said they found some of the money, $2 or $3 billion or something, stored away in some crypto wallet. I'm not going to go there. That's a gray area at the moment. That crypto bloody wallet thing. The whole crypto thing is creepy. If you bother to ask my advice on whether you should get involved in crypto, I suggest you ask it slowly and intensely because my answer while you're asking will be no. Mr. Wilkinson, you're not interested in innovation? I certainly am. Mr. Wilkinson, you're not interested in progress? I certainly am. Mr. Wilkinson, you're not interested in people who have money to invest in something creative doing so? I certainly may be, depending on what it is. But crypto is money that goes quietly onto some blockchain, into some wallet that has a key by some individual, known and unknown, somewhere and anywhere in the world. To me, I don't mind how that sounds technologically. In practice, the risk definitely exists, and there's underlying risk known and unknown to that entire process. And so as a result of that, the best we could have possibly done at minimum was to have firm, strict regulation in place from the beginning in an effort to mitigate, maybe even if something happened, the result may not have been as intense and as catastrophic as it ended up being. Another local example of risk issues. Wow. So in the Little Bahamas, we have our own plethora of risk catastrophes. We don't have to go to the US. We don't have to go to Europe. We don't have to go to South America, the Middle East, Africa, India, China, where they all have even bigger problems. We have our own little thing going on in terms of the suffering and the losses from risk mismanagement in my mind. All right. So before we get into our discussion then on the mitigation side of it, which is insurance and similar types of steps we can take to reduce or mitigate or transfer or avoid risk, or even accept it, finding ways to keep the cost to a minimum. We could never get rid of risk completely. I hope you realize that by now. It's impossible, but we could minimize it, we could reduce it, and sometimes we could even transfer it depending on the nature of the risk. But again, just like going into the doctor's office, the treatment of a result is only as effective as a proper diagnosis. Anybody agrees with that? The treatment result is only as effective as a proper diagnosis. Is that true?
Yes.
Absolutely. Same thing applies to risk. The mitigation of risk is only as good as the diagnosis, the evaluation, the review, the investigation, the determination of what the risks are for real. Not just some crap to report to the regulators to get them off our backs. What are our risks for real? Interesting. So risk management then has been described once again under what I call the key terms, and I put them there just to remind you of a couple of things, in case you didn't know. Is all about what we call the coherent and balanced assessment. See? Coherent and balanced assessment and treatment. In case you're still wondering what risk management is. By the way, can somebody type in the word coherent in Google? Because sometimes we think we know, or we really don't know at all. Can somebody type in coherent and tell us what that means? Since it's part of the definition of risk management. Coherent?
Of an argument, theory, or policy logical, consistent, forming a unified whole.
Okay, can you read it one more time for your colleagues?
Of an argument, theory, or policy logical and consistent, forming a unified whole.
So if you think we just threw coherent in there by accident in managing risk, notice the first word in the definition of coherent says it has to be logical, not emotional, political, because somebody's related to us. None of that stuff. It has to be logical. What's the other word, Charnie? After logical?
Consistent.
Consistent, meaning not when you feel like it all the time. Well, I feel like it today, but I don't know how I'll feel tomorrow. That's not what is required when we're managing risk. And the whole process has to be unified. Everybody has to be what? On one accord. So if the board wants this and the CEO wants that, and the personnel thinks another thing, then you have a problem, Houston. That risk management process will fail, like anything else will fail if it's not logical, consistent, and unified. You don't believe me? Let me bring it home then to the greatest organization in the world, the home. Two people are married, they're head of the home of that organization. One is logical, one is, anyone? If one is logical, the opposite of that is?
Illogical.
Yeah. So one is logical, the other one is, God forbid, illogical. One is consistent, the other one, God forbid, is?
Inconsistent.
And she said quietly, inconsistent. And one is unified, prepared to work together, and the other is? What's the opposite of unified? What's the opposite of unified? What's the opposite of unity?
Division.
Okay, that's a nice one. Division. Yeah, if you're not unified, you're divided. All right. Or simply put, the opposite of unity is disunity or division. So imagine now having an organization called the home with that sequence among the leaders. Can you expect the best results under those conditions, class?
No.
No. You don't believe it? Try it. See what happens. Some people are already in it somewhere. Same thing applies to the firm, the church, the country. If you don't have logic, consistency, and unification, you're always going to have major problems and put whatever you're dealing with at risk. You don't have to take my word for it, put it to the test. And then you could send me a note and tell me how well that worked. But I can tell you before you even put it to the test, it will not ever work properly. Ever. Okay. All right. So that is a reminder of the risk management definition, something we really could keep in mind, not only for our jobs, perhaps for our own environments. Certainty is a lack of doubt. We know that. Uncertainty is having doubt. It's important that we know the difference. I hope we do. I'm sure we do. And then I give you another definition of risk again, which is very similar to the ones we discussed earlier. That whatever is going on in terms of outcome, there will be a variation. Things will not go according to plan. Cannot be measured 100%. And whatever estimation we come up with, it is subject to change. That's risk. I mean, I'm talking to you right now about the issues of risk, and suddenly I might go quiet. Now, I may have gone quiet for a couple of reasons, like the light went off. See, I could not predict that. That's risk. The computer failed. The hard drive stopped. That's risk potential. Or I simply fell over at my desk and left this world, gone to cloud 9 to kick back no more BEC bills. Could be any one of those issues. That is the nature of risk. Okay. What do we mean by exposure to risk, anyone? It's right in your notes. What do you mean by exposure to risk, exposure to loss? What is that? Exposure to risk, exposure to loss. What's that?
There's a probability for it to happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Couldn't put it better myself. There's a probability that something might occur. Absolutely. Simply put, not complicated, not convoluted. The possibility that something might happen. And that is the nature of risk. So there's always a possibility. God forbid some of those things we don't want to happen, but there's always the possibility. An organization should always be knowing this and taking steps to mitigate. Okay? So for example, if you have any idea, for example, of a potential loss, which we call X in this case, and the probability that that loss will occur, we just have a little geo expression called PX. Okay, probability and the probability of loss. And so mathematically, we can try mathematically sometimes to work out what the outcome would be and what we can expect that loss to be. So mathematically, we can come up with something, and even that is not perfect. It is only an estimate, because probability is always only an estimate. Mathematically. Sometimes people believe that if something is mathematical, it's perfect. It's not. Okay? By no stretch of the imagination. It is just a tool like any other tool to help us get things done. Like the computer. Some people suddenly, for some reason, still believe the computer is so brilliant. It's a brilliant invention, but it is nowhere near the brilliance of human beings. But we seem like we're forgetting that just because we have AI and the computer can be programmed to do all kinds of little incredible things. And therefore, some people are even thinking soon we wouldn't even need half the people in the world that we have. We'll just let the computers do it. Another risk issue. Because to even think about that possibility creates unknown and unforeseen risk for the future. Because we always think we're smarter than God himself. Imagine that. Just because he gave us the ability to create a little stinky computer that is as dumb as hell. It's only as smart as what we computed put into it. And if you throw some water on it, it'll rust. And if you don't put anything in, nothing will come out. Is that true, Star? Student? Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Nobody wants to discuss that truth. Not to mention the risk associated with deluding ourselves into thinking that is not true. See, risk. Risk. You don't have to believe in risk. So I don't believe there's any sun. That's okay. The sun is still coming up. So it doesn't matter if you don't believe it. Risk is one of those things like the sun. Whether you believe it or not, it's there. And if you don't deal with it, it will deal with you. Meaning organizations, individuals, countries, doesn't matter. All right. So you see then on page 11, I gave you several definitions of risk again. See? And these are only just reminders. We talked about 1 or 2 definitions earlier. We talked about 1 or 2 a short time ago. And then I give you a whole other set of variations. Just to keep you reminded about not only the definition of risk, but the variations in the definition of risk, which still leads to risk to be dealt with. Okay? For example, it is a general term for unwanted, uncertain events. See? Yeah, unwanted, uncertain. We hate that. It is also seen as an expected loss, another thing associated with risk. Unwanted, uncertain, and losses. like when somebody you love very much dies. We know people are going to die, but sometimes, even though we know people die unexpectedly for some reason, and then so we run the risk of unexpected death, even though we know that death is inevitable. Okay? Even something like that, not coming out of the organization, and the same thing applies within the firm. If you don't look at these things, you're gonna have the same issues: losses, fines, penalties, revocations of licenses, and the list goes on. Reputational damage. See, these are all losses, unwanted, associated with risk. There's so many variations and the different kinds of risks. Some we can predict, some we cannot predict. And certainly the last one is the risk to threats. Well, what can we do? The best we can do is to continue to monitor our risk, so we see a threat, we can deal with it. Okay? By all means. Now, I have a question for the ladies in the room. Can you hear me, ladies?
Yes.
Okay. This is for the ladies, not the meeting. Sometimes my wife would do certain things, and I'd say, like, sweetheart, why are you doing that? She said, I'm doing it because I need to stay beautiful for you. And I'm like, wow, after all these decades, she still wants to be beautiful for me, even though she is beautiful no matter what. Now, ladies, why do you think she would say that? Remember now, I'm not like Dimitri. I wasn't on my those stinky 6 years. Sorry, Dimitri. That's a great achievement, trust me today. But why does she say that anyway? Ladies, sorry. Sophia? You're a girl, why would she say that?
To make you feel,
Say it again?
to make you feel good.
Of course, why not? Why not? Of course. Way to go, Sophia. Thank you for giving me a truthful, upfront answer about girls. Women, of course. And it does make me feel that I don't have any problem with it at all. Benitra, what's your take? Why did she say that?
I agree with her. I mean, you said that.
Yeah. Doggone it, it works every time. I don't care how many decades, at least in my case. Candace? Why would she say that? Paula? Why would she say that?
I'm not sure.
Why would you say that to your husband 30 years from now? You think, if you can even imagine?
I can't imagine, so I can't give an answer.
Thank you for a very honest answer, Paula. You'll have to wait the 30 years, right? Absolutely. Denise, why would she say that?
Yes, to make him feel included, like a part of it.
Absolutely. Now, here's the kicker. Could there be any risk issues involved that she may not even be aware of just by saying that? She might just be saying it to make me feel good. But could there be risk issues involved in some other people's minds out in the world? Okay, I know risk, and I'm only putting this to you because you're like, how does that relate to organizational risk? But everything relates to everything, especially in risk. Now, some people, for example, when they get a certain age, they go out and have a facelift. Why do they do that, ladies? And then the husband said, why did you do it? So I did it because there's so many young girls out there, and I just want to continue to look younger so that you don't run off with a young girl. Is that a realistic risk in some people's cases?
I think so.
It's realistic. Nothing wrong being honest about it. Not everybody does that, but some people are like that. Like, man, they are afraid that if they can start to look older and older, then their spouse is male or female, might run off with the next young thing that passes with no logical reason. See, logical again. See my point? It's all interconnected. How does that affect the organization? Well, if that happens to you, then you go to work all messed up and can't work properly. See, it's all interconnected. Risk is it's a phenomenal thing. That's really the point I'm trying to make. And it's oftentimes there, even when we don't realize it, or even when we're not even aware of it, or even when we cannot vocalize it, or even describe it, for that matter. Okay? If you look at the fulcrum, do you see the fulcrum that's sitting there on page 11? That balancing thing, the triangle in the middle. Everybody see that?
Yes, financial business.
Yeah. On the one end, that's leaning down, we have financial and financial leverage risk. On the other end, that's pushing up our business and uncertainty risk and operational leverage. In other words, risk is ever present, up and down. By the way, I need to say something while I remember. For next week's class, I almost forgot, actually. That would have been a tragedy. Next week, Saturday, I have to attend an appointment in the morning, which will be finished by before noon. But I wanted to find out from you guys, would it be a major problem if we have our class at 12 instead of 10 next week? So I can deal with that matter? Is that possible?
Well, 12 is fine with me.
I would appreciate that very much because it's something I've tried to put off. But if I put it off, I run the risk. See, risk again. I run the risk of this and that and the other thing. And so I had to weigh the risk and decide what I could possibly do. See, this crap is very practical. And so at the end of the day, after measuring that bloody risk, I said, you know what? Let me ask my students if they have a problem with coming in 2 hours later so we can finish our final sessions. And then that way, I don't have to take on the brunt of that potential risk. So I would appreciate that if we can do that. If we can meet at 12 rather, instead of 10. Hopefully that gives you a chance to sleep a little later, do something in between, and then we come at 12 o'clock and finish our session. And that would be more than appreciated for next week Saturday. Okay? So hopefully we all can kill some birds with that shot somewhere along the way. So this fulcrum is risk going up and down. Notice it never goes away. It keeps lurking, hanging, and staying in our presence. And our job every day is to balance that risk. And balancing that risk, depending on the nature of our job, where we are, our positions, etc., is a far greater responsibility than many of us even might be aware of. Okay, for sure. One of the other things that we need to keep in mind in dealing with the risk issue is, in addition to everything we've talked about so far, to break down risk in some other manageable parts that can help us remember the approaches and even some of the things we need to do. For example, some of the components of risk that we should be thinking about, and I think this is still on page 11, page 12, has to do with recognizing any threats in our environment. Anything that's detrimental in our jobs that could cause a loss in our lives and whatever the threat is, it's very important to be able to recognize it. Can we see it all the time? Of course not. We already saw early in our discussion on risk. It's not possible to see it every time. But we should make every effort to recognize them whenever possible. It always helps to do that. Then, once we recognize it, we have to find out, do we have the resources to deal with it? For example, if you know you need to buy house insurance for your home, but your income is stretched to the limit, does that mean you should leave your house uninsured, Dimitri?
Definitely not.
No. So you know you need the resources to buy home insurance. Now, remember, part of risk is that year you may not have a fire. You may leave your home uninsured and nothing happens. The only problem with that is, Dimitri, what? What's the problem with that? Nothing might happen, but the problem is,
If something does happen, you're going to put yourself in more of a financial bind than where you started.
there you go. Something might happen. We just had a family of 10 or something lose their homes, correct? Anybody read the paper last week or the week before? The house burned down to the ground. My. And it was a generational home as well. Their grandmother, grandfather had the home. Their mom stayed in the home. Now the grandchildren and the mom in the homes, everybody, 10 people, including 6 children, are homeless. Did they have insurance? We don't know. The point is, things sure as hell can happen. So we have to, once we identify the threat, we have to find ways to get the resources to deal with the threat if it's a very serious threat. If not so serious, then maybe not. All right. The next thing we need to consider in risk is, what are the issues that can increase or decrease the threat? See, we recognize it. We ask ourselves if we have the resources to deal with it. If we don't, we get the resources depending on how serious it is or else. And then what are the various features that we can use to increase or decrease the threat? By all means. For example, insurance is not the only thing. One of the ways you might want to reduce the threat of a fire is making sure you teach children never to touch the stove. See? Some of us may not even think about that until the house burns down. Have a meeting at home or at the office or at home, let's say, and tell the children, don't light a match or else you could potentially burn the house down and burn yourselves up. Maybe that'll frighten them enough not to take a risk. Then by extension, you make sure that there are no matches where children can reach them. See, it's not just a matter of getting house insurance. You have to consider what you can do to decrease the threat. How about that? So this thing is not just something you do in passing. It has to be a very deliberate thing, risk management. And of course, the fourth thing to consider are the consequences. By all means, that's the bottom line. That's why we do the first 3, in order to eliminate the consequences completely or to minimize them to the greatest possible extent. So we don't end up like this guy who thinks that he's safe because he's on a tightrope with a little cushion at the bottom. Does that cushion means that he's completely safe? Anyone? Big cushion in heaven. Does that cushion mean he's completely safe?
Not at all.
Not at all. Don't be fooled by the fact that a big old hand is holding up the cushion. If he slips, he'll fall on the cushion. He might. But then again, he might not. He might fall the wrong way. The big hand with the cushion might miss him. The big hand with the cushion might move his hand as he's falling, as he wants him to fall. Welcome to risk. What can I say? All right. So let's take the next few moments we have to look at some of the business risks that many of you have already experienced, are experiencing, will experience in the future, or do not even know that you're experiencing. How about that? Business risks, many of them, see, around you. And I encourage you to be at least familiar with what they are. Just for the record, not just for examination, just for the record, just in case. Well, more importantly, in case you run into them from day to day. So what are the business risks you could potentially see? Technical risk. Okay. Having a lack of knowledge about new processes and ways to do things, new insurance methodologies, new covers, new whatever it is. Social risks. What's going on with your customer? Are they the same? What's going on with your staff? Are they striking? Are they mad? Are your customers dissatisfied with your product? Are you so enamored with your product you think everybody loves it just because you as an organization love it? Are you taking that kind of risk, economic risk? What about inflation, competition? How are you managing your money? Are you in tune with the government? Is government policies in line with what you're doing? Can it affect your business? When we decided to introduce the financial laws back in 2000 and the implementation of the compliance officer and the MLROs, et cetera, as put forth by FATF and OECD, companies were in total shock because now that's a whole new business cost that they have to write off. And they cannot make any return on that investment except to seek to protect their reputation and to remain compliant. See, political risk. That came from politicians and companies. And there's nothing you can do about it. Well, you can violate it or close your doors, but we all get the point. Then we have regulatory risk. Changes in legislation and regulations that we constantly have to be checking and making in order to remain compliant or else. Production risk. If you're a manufacturing firm, you have one supplier, you lose that supplier. You have two suppliers, you lose one, the other one doesn't have the products you need, and so on. Business is interrupted. Trying to find a new supplier involves a higher cost. The new supplier knows that they're the only one providing the product, so they charge you a fee no matter what you don't like it, too bad. Accept it or leave. See, all of these are risk issues every day. Doesn't matter what type of firm you are. Many of you work for financial institutions, so you're impacted from the financial services side, but many other people work for other kinds of entities as well, retail, wholesale, and otherwise, technological, and so on. And they too are faced with many of these risks, if not all of them. Marketing risk. What is the company's market share? Okay, banks, for example, are always in competition with each other for clients, client business. They're always checking their portfolios. Is the loan portfolio going up or down? If it's going down, people have to now go out and start selling the product. The bank now has these new products. Instead of having you pay a down payment, we'll finance 100%. All of these things will give you a lower rate of interest. All these things are marketing techniques in order to reduce the risk of losing customers. When customers come in, we try to smile, hopefully, because we don't want to get them mad. If we get them mad with poor service, they might go to the competition. These are all marketing risks that we have to consider. Financial. I think Dimitri mentioned something earlier that was connected to financial risk. The loss of financial status, financial resources, bad debts due to bad loans not being paid, stakeholders not telling creditors, and therefore loans starting to suffer, fall into bad debt, creates a financial risk for the company. But in this case, a financial institution. Credit loss, a major issue for financial institutions. Buying securities, stocks and bonds, and they're losing value. These are all financial risks, depending on the firm that you're in. I think he also mentioned earlier the issue of operational risk when we talk about human resources. Isn't that an operational risk, he said. And I said, yes. Where systems are failing and not working according to plan because people are not there, people are not properly trained, people are incompetent, people don't get the proper training for their jobs. And so it creates what we call operational risk. So this thing about risk makes no sense trying to ignore it. You could, like the old people used to say, you could play crazy and act like it's not there. But I think the point has been made that it is very much here. And the sooner we recognize that it is here, like we said, COVID is here to stay, they say. Really? We need to, if COVID is here to stay, imagine risk. It has always been here. We're just trying to make it something fancy by setting up all this cognizant stuff to give the impression that, this risk thing is a new phenomenon. It is not. It has been around from the beginning of time. When anybody knows who Adam and Eve is? Let's see if anybody answers that question. Mr. Wilkinson, we all know who Adam and Eve is. Because we all know Adam and Eve is everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So that's a simple question. All the exam questions should be that simple. Well, the reason why I ask you about Adam and Eve is because those of you who remember the story of the Garden of Eden would remember that God said to Adam and Eve, by extension, you are free to partake of anything in this bloody garden except what? Anyone?
The tree of good and
Knowledge.
evil, knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now imagine this, folks. You're in this big old garden, you can't even see the end. Everything is free. It's not like you have to buy it. See that? You don't even have to buy it. It was free. He said, eat anything you want. Go swimming, name the animals, have babies, hang out, walk through, relax. Everything is free. Just don't touch that tree, or you run the risk. See that? So those of you who think risk is new, forget it. Risk was here from the beginning of time. Don't touch that bloody tree, or you run the risk of what? Anybody knows? That's the problem with risk. See, it's sneaky. Does anybody know what risk they ran by touching that tree?
Getting kicked out of kicked out of the garden.
Yeah, losing your spiritual life and connection to God, losing all that free stuff and getting kicked out. See what risk does? And that's what risk does today. It creates what? White collar crime and what we call in Bahamianese, thieving, fraud, money laundering, corruption, deceit, and all kinds, same thing. So this risk thing is not a 21st century phenomena. For you youngsters who think, oh, this is new. It is not. This existed from the Garden of Eden, the very beginning of time as we know it. Okay? So don't be fooled into thinking that you are in a brand new environment that you have total control over. You must always be thinking about all the things we said so far in an effort to help you to manage this crazy thing, this all-encompassing thing, this thing that never goes away, called risk. Because if you don't, somewhere along the line, you will suffer the consequences, or somebody you know will suffer the consequences, which by extension will impact you. See how risk works? Even if you don't do it, like, I got this covered. You got to make sure other people you know have it covered too, who connected to you, because if they don't have it covered, they're going to bring their risk problems to you, who have it covered, whatever covered is. All right. So thank you very much. You guys have been great. Please go ahead. If you're not finished looking at the remaining notes, look at them. Don't forget my case study for next week. Please prepare your responses as best as you can. Email them to me. I will definitely be looking at them, and we will be discussing the points that you made in our next and final week session. Any questions, anybody, before we break?
Mr. Wilkinson, is political risk considered a business risk as well?
No question about it.
Okay.
Okay, very good point, and certainly something to keep in the forefront of risk management. Because remember, no matter how well your firm is working, if the politicians decide to make a decision that is detrimental to the day-to-day operations of your firm, dog eat your lunch. See my point? And when I say politicians, I mean anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, politicians and regulators in other countries have already made decisions like in the OECD in 5 countries, that are impacting our country and our companies and our financial institutions as we speak. That's why we have at the moment so many KYC and other requirements as it is, and legislation governing these things, because they decided that the Bahamas and this jurisdiction are tax havens, that people keep running to us with suitcases of money, that they're laundering and all this stuff, and so on. And therefore, these things have been put in place in order to try to control this thing. And so now we have all these things. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just showing you how political decisions in other countries, as you said, Paula, is at a risk. Better believe it is. Any decisions that we make for example, it's a good question, Paula. What made you think of that question?
I don't know if you ever, if you heard of King's College, the new private high school they're building out west.
Of course.
Yeah, it just came to thought because I remember under the F&M, their project wasn't approved. And then as soon as the PLP government came in, it got approved, and then the school was being built.
I rest my case. So Paula, thank you very much for that very real example. Those of you who are in her earshot, please be guided accordingly. It's a classic case of how politics can impact economics and entities such as the ones you work for. Okay. Now, what is interesting, Paula, is do we know why the previous administration did not approve it?
I think it was because Windsor and Life Rookie School had pushed back about it because it was we already have two, I don't know, what do you classify those schools as? Elite?
High-class private schools.
Okay, yeah, like high-class elite private schools.
Yeah.
They don't think a third one would have been, I guess, competition.
Oh, so now you're actually tying in all this crap you're talking about, Paula. But yes, it is competition. Because see, King's College, look at the name even. They didn't even call it J.L. Ali College. See? Why not? Because that's not a good name for a college like us with that kind of elitism. They call it King's College. Doggone it. That means anybody going there, you have to the King's College. Even sounds more sophisticated than Lightfoot Key High School. See that? The King's College. That's the marketing side. Don't think they call it King's College just for the hell of it. They didn't have anything to do. There's something in a name. There's a risk involved in naming it right, and there's a risk involved in naming things wrong. Don't underestimate the power of risk. So yes, Paula, the other two elite colleges and schools lobbied apparently against it, and they were successful until the new government came in. Question now is, why did the new politics agree? Uh-oh. It's not right or wrong, just to answer your question about politics and risk. Why did the new government agree? Well, they obviously didn't agree with the old lobbying. They said, man, another college? Great, let it rip. This is great for the economy. Besides, we don't want anybody, the other ones get us mad anyway. At least the competition. Let them fight it out. Whatever the reasons. Some of the reasons are logical. Remember that explanation, logical, huh? And coherent. Other reasons are not logical. But politics doesn't have to be logical. Politics is politics. It goes anywhere from logical to the absurd, depending on what's going on. But at the end of the day, it creates risk implications. Okay. Absolutely, Paula. Way to go in raising that real life connection. And I hope your colleagues have benefited from that question. Okay? To see all this crazy stuff actually is real. Not only is it real in some other part of the world, it's real in our very own country. And this is stuff that you guys are going to be constantly dealing with from all kinds of different angles going forward in terms of how you perform on your jobs and the decisions you make from day to day. Just remember, whatever it is, the common denominator is risk. All right. So if there aren't any more incredible questions like that, any other questions before we break? All right, fantastic. You guys have a great week. I'll see you next week at 12. Remember, when my case study is done, email it to me and we'll finish our discussion and discuss the points that you made on the case study to see how we can connect some of the things we have learned into that particular case study. And it doesn't have to be only risk issues. It can be accounting issues, finance issues, management issues, because remember, they all come together to create what? Risk implications. All right. So have a great week, please, and be safe and get back in one piece next week.
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
All right, on class.
Take care. See you next
Afternoon.
afternoon.